No, I really appreciate your coming along today for the sort of postponed launch of the survey findings of the Kids Life and Times and the Young Life and Times survey. There are some regular attendees here, and you're very welcome, but also the newcomers, very welcome. Thanks for coming along. So the format of these events is really that we present some key findings of the surveys. All the survey results will go up this afternoon on our respective websites, the Klt website and the Young Life and Times website. And the purpose of these events is really to talk to people and with people who are working with or on behalf of young people and children and young people to introduce some of the key findings before some of them appear in the media, which they always do every year, and to give you an opportunity as well to ask questions and comment. So this is a schedule for today's event. So as you can see, apart from myself, there are 4 other speakers. Katrina facilitates the questions at the end. Katrina is the director of the Kids Life and Times survey. I am the director of the Young Life and Times survey, and we're really pleased to be announcing that Mark Brown from the Executive Office will be giving a keynote today. Claire Dwyer will be from the School of Law here at Queen's University. We'll be speaking about the age of criminal responsibility, a really interesting set of questions we've asked in the Kids Life and Times survey this year, and how children understand the issues around the age of criminal responsibility. And for both of those, we have published research updates, which you may have lifted already. They were outside. Grace Kelly will afterwards speak about focus groups, like a mixed methods project, really consisting of focus groups and survey questions in both of the surveys on sports and physical activity. And that was a follow-up from last year's rather extended modules that we had in both of the surveys. And some of the questions that remained open at the time last year, we revisited during focus groups in 2016 and early 2017. So that's a schedule for today. What I'll do before I hand over to Mark Brown, I will take you through some of the perhaps interesting key findings in both of the surveys. Unfortunately, we have that many questions in both of the surveys that we can't possibly cover all of that. But there are some things that might be of interest to you, and I will go through those very quickly now. In terms of the background of the surveys, Young Life and Times is, for those of you who don't know, Young Life and Times is a postal survey amongst 16-year-olds. So the way this works is we have access to the Child Benefit Register. We get a data set from Her Majesty's Revenue and Custom every year with the postal addresses of the recipients of the Child Benefit. And we send out letters of invitation directly to the 16-year-olds. They have at that point an opportunity to opt out of the survey. We will tell them a little bit what the survey is about, why we contacted them, and so forth. If they don't opt out, they receive a questionnaire, and if they don't respond within about a month or so, they will receive a reminder. If they wish, they can complete online. In 2016, we had 1,009 completions, which represents a response rate of roughly 1 in 3. Slightly lower, about 2% lower than the last couple of years, but there's always a variation. 1 in 3 is a respectable response rate for a postal survey of 16-year-olds. And 18% only choose to respond online in 2016. It's the highest proportion ever, but you can see it's still less than 1 in 4, less than 1 in 4, 1 in 5, even less than 1 in 5. Responding online, despite the fact that we incentivize them with £1,000 overall or £10 shopping vouchers if they like. KLT is a online survey only, and it's run in the classrooms in the schools. So we write out to all the schools and to all children and ask them to complete the survey. Again, there's an information letter going out first, followed up by details about the accessibility of the online survey. And then there's 3 levels of consent involved in that, school level, parental level, and then the children, of course, as well, are asked to consent. So in 2016, this should be, rather than 15, I apologize for that typo here, we had 5,000 194 completions, which represents a response rate of 22%. These are the questions, so if you're interested in looking at the results up online later this afternoon or anytime afterwards, these are the questions that were included in the surveys. So we have background questions, obviously, in all the surveys. Sport and physical activity questions, including focus groups, were included in both YLT and Klt. In 2016, we had a large module as for the last 12 years, funded by the Executive Office on Community Relations and Minority Ethnic Groups. And for the first time, we asked questions on respect as well, and Mark will speak about that later on. We have questions from the Department of Education, funded by the Department of Education, on community relations, equality and diversity education. And we're delighted to say that we'll continue to work with the Department of Education next year as well on that and on shared education. We had, again, questions from the British Council. Those of you who were here last year will probably remember the two young girls speaking who were involved in the study last year. There were a really nice couple of girls presenting findings. We had only 2 questions funded by the British Council in Young Life and Times on internationalization and language learning, but these were supplemented with questions on Brexit, and I'm sure some of you will find that those interesting. There was a press release put out earlier with the key findings, so I hope you have lifted that. Victoria Dura is here in the second row, and Victoria is a lecturer in the School of Arts, English, and something else, Victoria, which I've forgotten now what it is, after languages, here at Queen's University, and we worked with Victoria on questions on culture, and that was also run in combination with 5 focus groups with young people on their understanding of culture. Katrina will talk. We have a separate event for that in September, which will Katrina later on introduce a little bit more in detail. And finally, these are the questions that Claire and Siobhan McAllister are responsible for. These are the questions on criminal responsibility in the Kids Life and Times survey, which were asked, again, funded like the questions on culture by an internal sort of funding body in Queen's University. Okay, so these are the backgrounds for the KLT survey, and again, that should be 2016. So we have a reasonably even participation by boys and girls. Most of those boys and girls who take part in the survey have grown up in Northern Ireland and were born here, 90%, and there's 10% who were either born in the Republic of Ireland or somewhere else. Most of them, over 3/4, live with both of their parents in their home, and in terms of the school breakdown, as you can see, again, there's a reasonably even split between Catholic maintained schools or controlled schools, and we reasonably represent integrated schools as well in KLT. In terms of Young Life and Times, the gender difference is slightly, there's slightly more females than males participating in the survey. Most of the 16-year-olds that participated also grew up in Northern Ireland and have always lived here. And in terms of the school breakdown, we have 55% of the respondents who attend grammar schools, 35% secondary schools, and 7% planned integrated schools or, formally integrated schools is perhaps the term that is being used by departments. The religious breakdown shows that 40% of our respondents are Catholics, 30% Protestant, and 30% have no religion. And we have less than 1% who have other religious backgrounds. I have 2 slides here that I want to talk about a new set of questions, and Mark Brown will allude to the questions in more detail later on. And this is the questions on respect that we've never asked before. That seems to be a new indicator that the departments are using to measure the relationships between communities here. And what we ask both the kids and the young people is to say, in an open question, what for them respect is. Okay, and here are some of the answers, which are reasonably representative for the kind of answers that we got. Okay, treat the others the way you want to be treated, to be kind to one another, to show empathy. But there is also in children here something that perhaps they learned at school or at home, be quiet and listen. So don't be cheeky. And when someone talks to you and you do it right away, that's respectful, apparently. And then I think I discovered the new Seamus Heaney here as well amongst the P7 children. So a very innovative response to what respect means, as you can see. So, and interestingly, if you ask 16-year-olds, the responses are not very different. Treat people the same way as you would like to be treated. I mean, that comes to be out as the understanding of respect. Okay, valuing someone as you would like to be valued and so forth. But still, we have interesting responses here in terms of, and we had a discussion with that when we were thinking about the questions. Not a reaction to people that needs earned. So you should have respect. You don't need to earn respect. People should respect you, full stop. And respect when you're aware of someone's authority. So that's a sort of slightly similar to what some of the children said as well. Okay, so there's still an understanding of authorities and respect for authorities. So we find that in Young Life and Times still. Interestingly, if you look at the findings, so is Northern Ireland a place where people respect each other? And you will see that both the kids, there's P7 children, that's the light grey columns here, and the dark blues, the Young Life and Times, people think that, broadly speaking, they agree that Northern Ireland is a place where people respect each other. But if you get to 16, the agreement with that statement is much weaker. Okay, so there's only 1% who strongly agreed with the statement that respect is, Northern Ireland is a place where people respect each other. And then if you get to 16, you get about 4 in 10 respondents who disagree. Okay, so that's probably something that we may want to discover or explore in a little bit more detail in the next few years. Now this is slightly complicated, this slide, so I will explain it in a bit more detail. What I've done here is that I've calculated mean responses, the average responses, on the basis of a scale, which is from 1, this happens almost every day, to 6, never. That happens never, okay? And these are the questions here. You are threatened and harassed, the first one. So how often does that happen to you? And you can see here that for Young Life and Times people, it almost never happens. The average response is 5.38, which means the response of the average 16-year-olds is between less than once a year or never. Okay, so it hardly ever happens. Whereas for children, the response is somewhere between once a year or less than a year. So there's slightly greater experience of being threatened or harassed. And interestingly enough, if you think about the last slide where children said, the P7 children, that they were more likely to say that Northern Ireland is a place where they're respected if it comes to personal experience of harassment, being called names or being insulted, receive poor services in restaurants. It is actually the P7 children who are more likely to say that this happens than the 16-year-olds. So that's really interesting. And again, we may need to discuss that. Overall, I mean, the most likely things that happen to 16-year-olds is people act as if they were better than they, but even then, it only happens like a few times a month on average. And for kids, the children, the P7 children, the most likely thing that happens to them is that they're treated with less respect than others, but even then, it happens roughly a few times a month. So that's what this graph shows. Again, the details are available on the website later on. Brexit. Everybody's interested in Brexit, and there are no surprises here, I have to tell you. So do you think you will be personally better off outside the EU? And we're looking here at family financial background. Okay, so even those who are from not well-off backgrounds. Okay, so these are 16-year-olds who say they come from not well-off socioeconomic family backgrounds. Even amongst those, 60% think amongst the 16-year-olds that they'll be worse off outside the EU. There's only one group of respondents, and we've written a long report for the British Council, which again will be available this afternoon on our website. There's only one group of respondents who think they'll be better off after Brexit outside the EU, and that's a group of Protestant respondents from not well-off family backgrounds. Everybody else thinks that they'll be worse off. Okay. And if they had a chance to vote, if the Brexit vote was held again, and if they had a chance to vote, the vast majority of respondents of 16-year-olds would vote to remain in the EU. If you break that down by national identity, British, Irish, or Northern Irish, it is the British respondents, those who identify as British, but even amongst those, only half would say they would remain in. Only half of those would say they would. Half of those would say they would remain. Just about a quarter would say they would leave. Okay, so there's amongst young people, and we knew that, of course, from exit polls and so forth. There's a very strong sense that they didn't want Brexit. Alcohol and substance use. These are two questions we asked for the. We have asked about cigarettes and alcohol and drugs before and solvents. We've never asked about e-cigarettes and the use of legal highs or NPS, new psychotic substances. Okay, so we can see here the lighter the color, the less people have used it, or the less people think that their classmates use it. Okay, so you can see here that alcohol remains the number one drug or number one substance, and 6 in 10 of our Young Life and Times respondents said that their classmates drink it every day or at least once or twice a week. Okay, so this is much higher than smoking cigarettes. The interesting finding here is that smoking cigarettes and e-cigarette use is very, very similar. So there seemed to be really a move from cigarettes to e-cigarettes. Okay, there's very little difference between the two. When it comes to legal highs or NPS, the perception is that from 9 out of 10 respondents that this is not used, so they don't know whether it's used. So there's a very small proportion of 16-year-olds who think that legal highs are being used every day or at least once or twice a week. Okay, and if you ask the respondents themselves whether they've ever done any of the following: smoked cigarettes, 20%, used e-cigarettes, 21%, which confirms again that there's a change in the use of cigarettes. Almost 2/3 said they had drunk alcohol themselves, and then when it comes to drugs, solvents, it's below 1. A very, very small proportion of 16-year-olds said they'd used solvents, and only 1% said they'd used legal highs. Okay, I apologize for not covering more topics. I mean, this is really all we can do in the time frame that we have available. Hopefully, some of those findings are of interest. And again, we upload today not just all the results broken by gender and religion for Young Life and Times and by gender for Kids Life and Times. We also upload the reports that we've written for the Department of Education on Community Relations and Quality Education, for the Executive Office on Community Relations. We upload the research updates that we published today on the age of criminal responsibility, and we upload the sport report. So all of the data will be available. And at this point, I would like to invite Mark to deliver his speech.
Thanks very much, Dirk, and good morning, everyone. I hope you excuse me taking the jacket off. It was getting a little bit hot. Very pleased to be here to join you all with the launch of the 2016 Kids Life and Times and Young Life and Times service. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mark Brown, and I'm Director of Strategic Policy, Equality and Good Relations in the Executive Office. I'll say it's a particular pleasure to be here today at the launch of the Kids Life and Times and Young Life and Times surveys. Not just because the Executive Office part funds the surveys, but because in a former civil service life I was a statistician and a researcher. So I love data, I love the research that comes out of it. I'm also a Queen's alumni. I did economic social history in the department that used to be a few blocks up there. An important part of my role in the Executive Office is taking forward and implementing the Executive's Good Relations strategy, together building a united community, or TBUC as it's commonly known. And in the presentation I'd like to draw out some of the key findings from the Young Life and Times and make some links across to government policy and the initiatives that we're taking forward at the moment. So, Together Building a United Community was published in May 2013, and it outlines how government, community and individuals will work together to build a united community and achieve change against 4 key strategic priorities: our children and young people, our shared community, our safe community, and our cultural expression. And each of these 4 aims has associated indicators that measure progress against that aim. There are 22 of these good relations indicators in total, and they're all drawn from data that's collected through the Northern Ireland Life and Times and the Young Life and Times surveys. And the data we get from the NILT and the YLT is critical in helping us to monitor the effectiveness of our policies and to make appropriate adjustments if necessary. It helps us to analyse progress over time and among different groups, such as gender, religion, and age. It helps us to identify differences to explore further, positive trends that we want to reinforce, and negative trends that we want to try and address. It also helps to demonstrate the extent of progress made and the additional road to be travelled. And this is critical in improving the effectiveness of what we do for the citizens of Northern Ireland, and also in justifying the investment of significant resources in good relations work in what is an increasingly constrained and competitive funding environment. So what is the data telling us? Well, 3/4 of young people feel that religion will continue to make a difference to how people feel about each other in Northern Ireland. However, this is the lowest figure since the question was first asked in 2003. And looking back, 52% of 2016 YLT respondents felt that community relations were better now than 5 years ago. 36% felt they were about the same, whilst only 4% felt they were worse. While there's been little change in the views of Catholic respondents since 2015, both Protestant respondents and those of no religion are more positive than they were then. If we take that question looking forward, less than half of respondents felt that community relations would be better in 5 years' time. Once again, there was little change in Catholic respondents, but a more positive response from Protestants and those of no religion. The fact that for each question, only around half of young people felt community relations were better than in the past and would be better in the future underlines, I think, the scale of the task facing us as a community in seeking to improve community relations. However, the increase in positivity among young Protestants is encouraging if it's sustained, as typically loyalist communities have felt they have not benefited from the peace process and have been harder to engage in good relations activities. And one of the key policy initiatives to improve good relations among young people that we're taking forward is the T-Buck Camps programme. These are cross-community camps which are held all across Northern Ireland and which bring young people together, some meeting for the first time, those from a different community background, to explore and discuss issues and to build sustainable relationships. Since 2015-16, over the last 2 years, 8,200 young people have participated in the programme with an investment of some 2.4 million. And we are in the process of offering funding to another 124 camps this year, which will enable another 4,600 young people to take part in the programme. And very positive outcomes have been reported, some 95% of the participants making new friends from a different background, and 93% feeling more positive about dealing with those from a different community. And it's also encouraging that 98% stated that they would consider taking part in other cross-community activities. And we all know that sport can be a great way to break down barriers and build positive relationships. 69% of Protestant respondents, 59% of Catholic respondents, and 69% of those with no religion report socialising or playing sport either very often or sometimes with people from a different religious community. Again, the T-Buck strategy seeks to build on and reinforce this positive trend through the cross-community sports programme, which is delivered by the Department for Communities. And the purpose of this programme is to use sport, physical and creative activity to deliver a good relations programme with the emphasis on tackling sectarianism, racism and improving good relations. We've had 3 phases of the programme and have been delivered in the pilot areas of the Lower Falls and the Greater Village area. An independent evaluation has highlighted the success and positive outcomes for those that have participated in the programme. Again, it's provided the opportunity for young people who would not usually engage with each other to come together, with many becoming friends. Education is something education is something all young people enjoy, and is often seen as an important medium for improving community relations. In the Young Life and Times survey, around 1 in 2 16-year-olds would send their own children to a mixed religion school. Some 36% of Catholic respondents, 55% of Protestant respondents, and 76% of those with no religion would choose to do so. In addition to the formal and integrated education sector, there's considerable government support for the development of shared education, So under the TBUC Shared Educational Campuses programme, 5 projects have been identified, and these are proposing and taking forward shared facilities in Limavady, Moy, Ballycastle, Brookborough and Dunedin Moneynick, and work to develop those shared campuses is ongoing. In addition to the TBUC Shared Education Campuses programme, TEO is also leading a major shared education programme as part of the Delivering Social Change initiative. Under the Delivering Social Change initiative, there's a shared education signature project which will invest £25 million up to June 2019 in assisting schools to embed shared education programmes. And through this programme in the 2016-17 academic year, there were 30,000 pupils and over 2,500 teachers in 356 schools involved in this shared education activity. Support for mixed workplaces among young people remains high at around 3/4 of respondents. In addition, some 59% of respondents would prefer to live in a mixed neighbourhood, although that figure's fallen a little from 2015. A key TBUC initiative in relation to the workplace is the Youth Initiative, which is being developed by the Department for the Economy as part of the TBUC strategy. This builds on a previous United Youth pilot, and it's a youth training programme with a focus on good relations. It's expected to become operational this autumn, and is planned to support over the next couple of years some 7,500 young people on training programmes with investment of some £30 million of funding from the European Peace Forward programme. In relation to mixed neighbourhoods, another of the 7 headline TBUC actions is the commitment to establish 10 shared neighbourhoods. To date, 5 shared housing developments have been established, 2 in Belfast, 1 in Saintfield, 1 in Newtonabbey and 1 in Cookstown. They've been completed and work is ongoing on a further 5 schemes. The Young Life and Time survey also allows us to keep track of the developing and shifting views of young people as the world around them changes, and it allows us to respond to these views as they change and take account of them in the policies that we develop. Northern Ireland society is rather different now than it was when these young people were born. While migration flows have slowed considerably in recent years, Northern Ireland is developing into a multicultural society. The number of NI residents who were born outside either the UK or the Republic of Ireland has increased substantially, and so has the number of people from non-white ethnic groups. The Young Life and Time survey has allowed us to chart how young people are reacting to these changes. The 2016 survey asked a range of questions on attitudes to and contact with minority ethnic groups, including on how favourable or unfavourable respondents feel towards minority ethnic communities. Other questions in this survey have been about racist bullying and harassment, prejudices, playing sport with and being friends with people from minority ethnic communities. And in the 2016 survey, over half of respondents felt favourable or very favourable towards minority ethnic groups, with only 2% feeling unfavourable. And his findings regarding young people mixing with people from a different ethnic background to themselves are very welcome. There's evidence of greater mixing. In 2016, around 2/3 of respondents from Catholic and Protestant backgrounds reported that they either very often or sometimes socialised or played sport with people from a different ethnic background to themselves. The figure in the previous year was around a half. And there's some evidence to show that people here have a more positive view of immigration than they do across the water. The Executive Office, along with the Department for Communities, is leading NI participation in the Syrian Vulnerable Persons Relocation Scheme. And so far, over 500 vulnerable Syrian refugees have been welcomed to Northern Ireland, and a further group of around 50 will arrive this week. I think that's particularly fitting, as you may or may not be aware, this is Refugee Week across the UK, a week centred around World Refugee Day on the 20th of June, and including arts, cultural and educational events that celebrate the contribution of refugees to the UK and encourages better understanding between communities. But we shouldn't exaggerate how multicultural our society is. Non-UK and Ireland migrants still make up only about 3.8% of the population. And the fact that our minority ethnic and migrant population is really very small does have significant consequences for us. The simple fact is that we are much less likely to have sustained encounters with migrants and minority ethnic people here than anywhere else in these islands. As a result, we don't benefit as much from the informal learning and education about people from other cultures, or to find out what minority ethnic people are really like. When the 2016 survey asked young people to explain why they felt prejudiced, the most common reasons they gave were media or news stories, stereotypes, perceptions of differences, not knowing many people from minority ethnic communities, and the influence of friends and families. And many of these reasons are really about lack of direct personal experience of minority ethnic people. And we can't afford to be complacent. Despite increases in inter-ethnic contact and friendship, in 2016 over 4 in 10 respondents reported that they had witnessed racist bullying or harassment in school. Well, looking forward, all of the work that we do in government, assuming we get an executive back, and I'm not going to speculate on that, will be directed by the Executive's draft programme for government. And as you may be aware, this is based around a number of outcomes, high-level societal goals which we will work towards collectively over successive government mandates, and associated indicators that measure progress towards each of these outcomes. Good relations work contributes to a range of the programme for government outcomes, but in particular to the following outcome, which is that we are a shared, confident and welcoming society that respects diversity. All of our policies in government are informed by evidence, and the new outcomes-focused programme for government increases this emphasis on data and evidence through application of the outcomes-based accountability approach. The accountability is achieved through transparent and robust use of data based on consistent measurement and reporting of relevant data. Thus, the draft PFG identifies a range of indicators which will be tracked and analysed over time as a way of measuring progress towards our desired outcomes. Within the TEO, I'm leading work on 3 indicators relevant to the outcome of we are a shared, confident and welcoming society that respects diversity. And these 3 indicators relate to increasing respect, increasing shared space and increasing reconciliation, which are considered to be critical factors in achieving that outcome. And to provide a baseline and means of monitoring progress, we have committed to the development of a respect index to measure the levels of respect that we as a society have for each other. As part of the development of a respect index, we trialled some attitudinal questions in the Northern Life and Times and Young Life and Times. Dirk's alluded to some of those, which will help to further strengthen our understanding and explore how respect can be measured in society. The questions included in the 2016 survey sought not only to capture people's broad understanding of the notion of respect, but also their everyday personal experiences and perceptions. I'm not going to go into the results in detail, but the results from the YLT survey demonstrated strong support for the concept of respect, with 86% saying that respect was important to them. Or in fact, they disagreed with the fact that it wasn't important to them, but I turned that into the positive. So 86% said that respect was important to them. However, only around 1/5 felt that Northern Ireland was a place where people respected one another. So it's obviously there's a big gap there. Some 6 out of 10 respondents agreed respect has to be earned, and 1/3 agreed that they only respected those who deserved it. Around 1/3 of respondents agreed it was up to the government to ensure that everyone feels respected. Around 1/3 neither agreed nor disagreed, and 1/3 disagreed. So this might suggest that while young people consider that government has a role, it's incumbent on individuals and communities to also take action to promote respect. So this new data, it's early days, we're only trialling this data. This new data will help us to establish a baseline and explore the nuances of people's experience against variables such as gender, religion and socioeconomic background. And the inclusion of YLT modules will also give us an insight into any significant differences across the generations. We're also proposing to use selected existing good relations indicators drawn from the Northern Life and Times, Young Life and Times to measure shared space and reconciliation. The indicators aren't ideal, there's further work that needs to be done, and I share concerns that the indicators don't fully reflect the complex and multidimensional nature of these concepts. And the good news for Dirk and other researchers is that we believe there's an important data development agenda here, and there's work that we will want to do. So, in conclusion, the programmes we fund, we believe, are having a real impact on the lives of individuals and communities. And the data from the Northern Life and Times and the Kids Life and Times demonstrate evidence of a clear willingness and desire to live in a united community. It's particularly pleasing to see positive changes reflected in these latest survey reports. And while I welcome that, there's still a lot to do. There remains much progress to be made, and we need to continue to build on what we've achieved to date. The involvement of our young people in designing, participating and promoting effective interventions is invaluable, and we welcome and encourage their independent feedback through surveys such as these. To build the truly inclusive society that we all aspire to, it's vital that we support and encourage young people to work together towards a shared future and better future that we all want. So it will continue to be a priority that we hear the voice of young people And we're committed to continuing our engagement so that young people have the opportunities to make their views known. The Young Life and Time Survey is an excellent example of collaboration and partnership working where TEO, Department of Education, Sport NI, the British Council and the School of Arts, English and Language at Queen's fund the various elements of the survey. In the context of our new programme for government and outcomes-based accountability, these surveys will be an increasingly important element of our work in developing, implementing and monitoring good relations policy in the future. So again, Dirk, thanks for the opportunity to be here today, and I wish you all very well in that work in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Dirk. As Dirk explained at the beginning, whenever we did the module on the sport and physical activity questions, we were able to do some qualitative work. So we did focus groups with 5 young people, 16. We did 5 focus groups with primary 7 children. So what I'm going to do now is just give a very brief overview of the findings, and I'm going to start with the quantitative findings and then I'll discuss the qualitative. For KLT, which was the P7s, we asked people how many times they spend 60 minutes or more on activity a week, which is the recommended public health activity levels for under 18. So in 2016, 36% of children, P7 children, either reached or got more than the recommended amount. And this was quite similar to 2015, it was slightly higher. For older young people, 16-year-olds, as you can see, is considerably less. Less than 1 in 10 of 16-year-olds were reaching the recommended activity levels in 2016. And this, actually the pattern is not much different to 2015. If anything, slightly higher number of young people never reached the recommended activity levels. When we look at it at gender, cross-gender, 2015 and 2016 are quite similar findings, and males were much more likely to reach the recommended levels than females. And again, as you can see, the 2015-2016, very, very similar. Only 5% of females, 16-year-old females, were reaching recommended levels. For the P7 children, the gender is, the percentages are higher, but the pattern is similar. And with boys being much more likely to reach the recommended levels, 60 minutes on activity at least 7 times every day or more. The reasons for taking part in sport and physical activity, when we asked, and this is YLT, this is 16-year-olds, when we asked them about motivating factors, the greatest motivating factor was to be fit and healthy, and the least factor was to compete with others. There's very little difference in gender except for competing with others. And this was a factor that came out in the focus groups, and it is something that I'll be talking about later on in the next couple of slides. And for KLT, again, similar findings. To be fit and healthy was the most motivating factor. To compete with others was the least motivating factor. Again, no gender differences except for competing with others, although the percentages are not just as stark as what they are for the YLT. We asked, again, for prohibiting factors, what was going to put young people off from taking part in activity, and the most significant factor across for 2015 and 2016 was not enough time. And again, this is another factor that came out in the focus groups, and it's something that I'll be talking about later on, which actually both supports this finding, but it makes more sense. It actually makes the finding much more understandable. For young children, KLT, there were some significant differences between 2015 and 2016, and I think really this is one of the challenges that you face when you're doing work with young children. But lucky enough, with the focus groups, being able to carry out the qualitative work, we were able to delve into these factors in much more depth. So whenever, this is the qualitative findings now, and as Dirk had said earlier on, we were able to do 5 groups with 16-year-olds and 5 with P7s, and they were arranged over various areas across Northern Ireland, and the children, the P7 children, came from schools across different areas in Northern Ireland and also different types of school. So we wanted to know how sport and physical activity was being interpreted. So we just started off with a very broad question, you know, what do you think whenever you hear the word sport, and what do you think whenever you hear the words like physical activity? And very much sport was something that was thought of as very organised. It was very planned. It was structured, and it was something that you competed with in a team, and it was most likely to be described by the name of a certain sport, which was either football or basketball. On the other hand, physical activity was much more spontaneous. It was just sort of everyday stuff, and I think these 2 quotes show this very well. And if the first quote, and it's notably a male, said this: that sport is something you compete with other people against. And it was, you know, so whenever we were carrying out the focus groups, males were much more likely to talk about competing in this kind of way. They were likely to talk about winning, competing to win. But the differences between the way males and females talked about competing was much more complex than just simply, you know, males favoured competition whereas females didn't. The females did talk about competing, but they tended to talk about competing against themselves, to set an individual goal and to set their own targets and to reach, you know, to sort of to reach a level and then set another target for yourself to reach maybe a higher level. So I think it's something, it's worthwhile noting that it wasn't competition per se that females were against. It was just a different type of competition. And, you know, as well as individual goals, females talked a lot about setting even small group goals. You know, whereas if they were working or if they were doing a physical activity within a group, they would maybe set a group goal and reach that, as opposed to sort of competing against. Again, this is YLT. When we asked about barriers to participation, the 3 main barriers was the academic subjects versus physical education, and this was practically universal across all the groups. All the young people we spoke to said that their school gave more credence to academic subjects. Physical education was the one subject that you could get out of or the one subject that was forfeited if maybe extra time was needed for, say if they were coming up to maybe an exam or was coming up the needed revision. it was physical activity that was these classes. Perceived teacher expectations. Now, whether this is justified or not, there definitely was the perception among the young people that we spoke to that teachers knew who the sporty ones were and that they had higher expectations in their sporting achievements for the group who were sporty. I mean, it was more than once we young people used the phrase the sporty girls, and they knew if they were a sporty girl or they weren't a sporty girl. So what the young people then said was that this made it actually easier then to get out of PE if they wanted to, because they thought then that the teachers had higher expectations, and because these were 16-year-olds, they thought that, well, the teachers know who are good at sports and it's actually easy to get out of it. You just write yourself a note. And competing time demands. Again, this goes back to the survey where when the young people, the biggest factor that prevented young people from taking part was not having enough time. This again was completely universal across every single group that we spoke to. They had hours of homework, of coursework, and a lot of these young people had part-time jobs as well. For example, this young male said, after school I worked from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. So, you know, it was actually, it was challenging to find the 60 minutes in or more per day. Discouraging factors. Of the females that we spoke to who were engaged in or whose school organised mixed PE classes, this undoubtedly put young females off taking part in sport in school. It didn't put the males off so much, but they knew that it put the girls off, and they said that they knew it did. They said, you know, the girls will sit at the side. Now there were a few, it wasn't general across the groups, but there were a few young males that we spoke to said that they actually didn't like the mixed PE classes either, because they said, you know, people think body image is just a female issue. You know, I don't like doing sport in front of the girls. But as I say, in general, it was the girls who were really against the mixed PE classes. Dissatisfaction with school facilities, this was where all the young people that we spoke to had access to a gym in their school, but they, except for one group who, a couple of the young people in that group attended a school that was quite recently built, and their facilities, they said, were great. Most of the young people thought the gym was too small, or the equipment wasn't up to date, and they didn't like the way gym classes were organised. They thought it was unstructured. And when we were discussing this afterwards, you know, a few people said, you know, we would expect it to be planned, and we would expect you know, the sort of activities to be more planned. We were sort of, you know, because a couple of them talked about private gyms and kind of thinking, were there expectations, you know, based on what was outside? Were they thinking that maybe that school should be like this? And biased media focus, well, they were very aware that the media just focuses on where the money is, and that's football, men's football. And for motivators, we asked young people what did they think, what would they like, what would get young people more active. We talked about variety of classes in school. Some examples of what they said was maybe yoga, Pilates, walking groups. Walking groups were one of the things that quite a number of young people brought out. This was very popular. They talked about, but they also didn't talk about walking groups or walking clubs as a soft option to sport. They saw it as something that you could maybe up your game a bit. And what one young person said, there's no dilly-dallying in the walking group. They could maybe, then they talked about setting a target. And again, it kind of ties in with activities with personal goals. They talked about walking further in the same amount of time, or, varying the route or making it more challenging. And this quote, it makes so much sense. Only a young person could have said it. Do more in school. You're there 5 days a week, 7 hours a day. And from from the findings from the focus group, this made a lot of sense, because if their outside school days or hours are taken up with coursework and schoolwork, if they're not doing it in school, the likelihood is they're not reaching the 60 minutes of activity or more. Now this is the KLT now. Basically, more or less, we wanted to know the same thing. What did young children think about sport and physical activity? And it was very similar to what the older people thought of. And I love this quote. You don't have to be good at physical activity, you just have to do it. Again, they saw sport as structured. It was something that you had to do. One young person said you have to have stuff for it. You have to have your boots, and you have to have your shin guards, and you have to have something else. Whereas it's just physical activity, you just do it. And we asked young people then to say what counted as being active, and they had really strong views about what counted as being active and what didn't count. We used photographs, and there was a young child in the photograph carrying out an activity, and we asked them to score on a scale of 1 to 10 how they thought how active the person in the photograph was being. And we also we were interviewing in a special school, so the young kids were given a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a thumbs in the middle and they were very clear that one of the photographs was a young boy and girl playing the computer. That scored, I think, 0, and they were absolutely, no, that doesn't count. But what counted was swimming. They liked things that made them happy, they said. Things that, and again, actually, things that they could get good at after a while. One of the photographs was jiu-jitsu, and I remember one of the young people saying, there's belts in jiu-jitsu, and you can sort of, work towards one belt, and then when you get better, you can work towards another belt. So they were also sort of talking about this kind of, building up, and they did as well talk about intensity and duration of what they wanted to know. Even when we were talking about the photographs and they were scoring photographs, they were saying, well, one of them was a boy walking to school. And somebody said, well, how far is he walking? Where's the school? Does he do it every day? Does he walk home at lunchtime? And, he says, but it depends, and it depends on how many hours, and it depends. So again, sort of intensity, they were aware that you needed to push yourself a bit, but you were pushing, and it was something that you could maybe get better at in time. Another activity that we did with the young people was very loosely based on a logic model, where we asked young people to come up with a get active plan. And we said, right, well, I want you to imagine that your friend comes to see you and says, look, I don't think I'm being active enough. I need a Get Active plan. So we were sort of trying to explain to them what would you need to put into this plan, you know, and what might the outcome be, or what would be the output, you know, what would you get out of it once the plan started to work. And then in the third step, well, what difference do you think that this would make? We had Get Active plan, that they all named them as well, but Get Active plans for Skylar, Ronaldo, Sprinkles, I think. There was we had sort of good fun to doing this. So what we did then was we got a 3-step Get Active plan by taking everything that the young people across the 5 groups, we put everything together. So for input, what was the inputs were, and they all knew, well, you needed to be prepared, and you have to have willpower, and you need to be determined. And one group thought it would help if they said a prayer. So I think it might help me, but then whenever there were, what was the output, and then they were thinking and they said, well, you know, so they were actually very similar across everything that the young people said were quite similar across the different groups. They said, well, you know, to start walking more, listen more in school, play outside, exercise more, and then the outcome and which would, you know, what difference is it going to make? And I think this is really interesting because the differences that all the young children said it would make was not just physical. They were not just, it was physical health. It was social and emotional and developmental in some cases. You know, you'll have a smile on your face. You'll feel more happy inside. You'll inspire others. And the last one there, be like a turtle, I didn't really understand what that was. But apparently, being a turtle is a developmental, behavioural developmental technique that whenever the young person's feeling stressed, they be like a turtle, like, you know, come in like a turtle. So anyway, we put this together, and that's our 3-step Get Active plan. But what this is, I think, is completely child-centred, because it was the young people that came up with this plan. When the team were talking about it when we were writing up the final report, we actually thought that maybe schools might be interested in this Get Active plan, as I say, because it's completely child-centred. But anyway, as Dirk said, the final report will be up online very shortly. So thanks very much. Thank you.